Dr. Elijah Carter, a world-class neurosurgeon, boards a flight to Paris, only to be met with arrogance and discrimination. But when the same man who mocked him suddenly collapses, Elijah is the only one who can save him. That should have been the biggest event of the flight. It wasn't. A mysterious poisoning, a hidden conspiracy, a dangerous organization that will do anything to keep their secrets buried. And when the plane becomes a battlefield at 30,000 feet, the only way to survive is to fight back. Who can be trusted? Who is pulling the strings? And what happens when there's nowhere left to run? Buckle up, this is one story you won't forget. Before we dive in, let us know, where in the world are you watching from? And if you love intense, action-packed stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a twist. Dr. Elijah Carter, one of the most renowned neurosurgeons in the world, boards a flight from New York to Paris, expecting nothing more than a few hours of rest before his medical conference. But before he can even settle into his first-class seat, he is met with hostility. "Sir, I believe you're in the wrong seat," a flight attendant says, her tone carrying a hint of condescension. Elijah raises an eyebrow. "No, this is my seat," he replies calmly, holding up his ticket. A chuckle comes from a well-dressed man nearby. Richard Davenport, a high-profile CEO, smirks as he adjusts his gold cufflinks. Maybe he's confused. "This isn't economy class," Richard mutters, loud enough for those around to hear. A few passengers stifle laughter. But when the flight attendant checks the tickets, the truth sends a ripple of shock through the cabin. "Mr. Davenport," she says hesitantly, "it appears you're the one in the wrong seat. Your assigned seat is in economy class." A stunned silence follows. "Come on, that's impossible." Richard's face turns red with disbelief. Laughter erupts in the cabin as he angrily grabs his belongings and stomps toward economy. Elijah exhales, shaking his head. He isn't interested in drama. All he wants is a peaceful flight. But fate has other plans. Within minutes of takeoff, a loud bang echoes from the right side of the aircraft. The lights flicker, turbulence rattles the cabin, and a flight attendant rushes to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue. Please remain calm." But the tension in the air is palpable. Then, another crisis strikes, far more immediate and personal. A woman gasps for air, clutching her chest before collapsing into the aisle. A panicked flight attendant shouts, "Is there a doctor on board?" Silence. All eyes turn to Elijah. As he stands, a realization dawns upon the passengers. The man they belittled just moments ago might be the only person who can save a life tonight. But saving her won't be as simple as it seems. Because this isn't just a medical emergency. Something else is happening on this plane. And Elijah is about to find himself at the center of a mystery he never signed up for. Elijah kneels beside the unconscious woman as the murmurs of worried passengers fill the cabin. He places 2 fingers on her neck. Pulse. Weak but present. Her breathing is shallow, her lips slightly blue. "What happened?" he asks, already in doctor mode. A young man sitting a few rows away hesitates before saying, "I saw someone give her a drink right before she collapsed." Elijah's gaze sharpens. "Who?" The young man looks around nervously before pointing toward a man in a black suit sitting 2 rows ahead. The man doesn't react until a flight attendant approaches him. Then, in a sudden, startling motion, he bolts from his seat. "Hey!" A passenger shouts. 2 flight attendants rush forward, trying to stop him, but he's already moving toward the galley at the back of the plane. Elijah barely has time to process this before a flight attendant leans in, whispering urgently, "Sir, we need to move this woman to the galley where there's more space to help her." Elijah nods, but something feels off. Why would someone poison a woman on a plane? And why would the suspect run? As they carry the woman to the back, the intercom crackles again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Due to a technical issue, We are making an emergency diversion to Iceland. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. A diversion? Elijah glances toward Richard Davenport, whose smugness has turned to pure panic. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. First my seat and now this. I paid for a direct flight. The passengers ignore him. Right now, everyone is far more concerned about two things. One, a woman's life hangs in the balance. Two, there's a man on this plane who just tried to escape and no one knows why. Elijah focuses on the unconscious woman. He has no tools, no hospital, just his hands and his knowledge. But before he can begin treating her, something even stranger happens. She suddenly grabs his wrist. Her eyes flutter open, and she whispers words that send chills down his spine. Help me. They're watching. Then, before he can respond, she slips back into unconsciousness. Elijah freezes. Who is they? And what the hell is really happening on this plane? Elijah's pulse quickens. Help me. They're watching. The words linger in his mind, a cryptic warning wrapped in desperation. Who is they? And why did she collapse after drinking from that glass? He doesn't have time for questions. Cynthia's pulse is weakening. She needs oxygen, Elijah says, scanning the cramped galley for anything useful. A flight attendant hands him a portable oxygen mask. He gently places it over Cynthia's face, adjusting the flow. She stirs slightly, but her breathing remains unsteady. What do you think is wrong with her? A flight attendant asks. Could be a reaction to something in the drink, Elijah says. Or his thoughts trail off as he notices something. A bruise forming along Cynthia's wrist. Not just any bruise. Finger marks. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. Elijah exhales sharply. We need to find out what was in that drink. Now. A flight attendant nods and hurries off. But Elijah's instincts tell him this isn't just a medical emergency. It's something far more dangerous. Meanwhile, back in the main cabin, chaos is unfolding. The man in black who had tried to escape is now cornered near the rear exit by two flight attendants and a muscular passenger. Sit down, one attendant orders. The man hesitates. Then he makes his move. With startling agility, he shoves past the passenger and lunges toward the emergency exit handle. Gasps erupt. The flight attendants react fast, tackling him to the floor. But as they struggle to restrain him, something slips from his pocket, a small vial. It rolls across the floor, stopping at the feet of none other than Richard Davenport. The arrogant CEO stares down at it. Something shifts in his expression. Elijah notices it from across the cabin. Does Richard recognize the vial? Before he can act, the restrained man snarls. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Elijah locks eyes with him. Then why don't you tell me? The man smirks, but says nothing. A flight attendant picks up the vial. Inside is a clear liquid. What is this? She asks. The man scoffs. Wouldn't you like to know? Another attendant steps forward. Sir, we're detaining you until we land in Iceland. Elijah doesn't miss the flicker of fear in the man's eyes at the mention of Iceland. Why Iceland? And why would someone carry an unknown substance on board? As the detained man is secured in a seat, Elijah turns his attention to Cynthia, but something else immediately demands his focus. Richard Davenport is sweating. His hands tremble slightly as he stares at the vial. Elijah steps closer. Something wrong, Mr. Davenport? Richard's gaze snaps to him. Don't talk to me. Elijah folds his arms. You recognized that vial, didn't you? Richard's jaw tightens. I don't know what you're talking about. Elijah isn't buying it. Before he can push further, a flight attendant hurries back. Dr. Carter, we checked the drink Cynthia had. It contained, she lowers her voice, a muscle relaxant. A strong one. Elijah's mind races. Enough to make someone collapse? He asks. The attendant nods. If the dosage is high enough, yes. Elijah glances at Cynthia's bruised wrist. Someone drugged her, then grabbed her. But why? The pieces aren't fitting together until Richard suddenly stands up. "I need to use the restroom," he mutters. But Elijah sees it, the sheer panic in his eyes. Richard isn't just nervous. He's scared. And fear means guilt. Elijah blocks his path. "No, you're staying right here." Richard glares at him. "Move, or I'll have you arrested for harassment." Elijah doesn't flinch. "Sit down." For the first time, Richard looks small. And then a new voice cuts through the tension. "You should listen to the doctor, Mr. Davenport." Everyone turns. Cynthia is awake. Her voice is weak, but her eyes are clear. And when she speaks again, her words send a shockwave through the cabin. "I know what you did, Richard." Elijah watches as all color drains from the CEO's face. For the first time on this flight, Richard Davenport is completely, utterly silent. A heavy silence blankets the cabin. Elijah watches Richard's face drain of color. He's guilty of something. But what? Cynthia is still weak, but her eyes are sharp. "I know what you did, Richard," she repeats. Her voice is raspy, but every syllable is laced with certainty. Richard shakes his head. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Cynthia exhales, struggling to sit up. Elijah steadies her. She looks at him, then back at Richard. "You really thought you could get away with it," she says. Richard scoffs. "This is ridiculous. She's delirious." He turns to the flight attendant. "I demand to speak with the captain. Now." But no one moves. All eyes are on Cynthia. Elijah studies her. She isn't just some random woman. She has the poise of someone used to power, to influence. And despite the near-death experience, she's in control. Cynthia turns to Elijah. "Dr. Carter, do you know who I am?" Elijah shakes his head. She offers a tired smile. "I'm Cynthia Wallace, CEO of Phoenix Biotech." A murmur spreads through the passengers. Even Elijah recognizes the name. Phoenix Biotech is a cutting-edge pharmaceutical company known for its breakthroughs in neurological research. His specialty. Elijah narrows his eyes. "And what exactly does Mr. Davenport have to do with you?" Cynthia sighs. More than he'd like to admit. She glances at Richard. "Would you like to tell them, Richard? Or should I?" Richard clenches his jaw. His confidence is crumbling. "I have nothing to say," he mutters. Cynthia chuckles, but it's cold. "That's unlike you. Lying has never been a problem before." Elijah watches Richard's fists tighten. The man is cornered. Then Cynthia drops the bombshell. "Richard used to be my business partner," she says, "until he stole our most valuable research and sold it to someone else." Gasps ripple through the cabin. Elijah raises an eyebrow. That explains Richard's discomfort. But it doesn't explain the vial, or why someone tried to silence Cynthia. Elijah glances at the man in black, still restrained. Was he working for Richard? Why would someone poison you? Elijah asks Cynthia. She exhales. "Because I wasn't supposed to make it to Paris." Elijah frowns. "What's in Paris?" Cynthia locks eyes with Richard. "A press conference. I was going to expose everything." More gasps. Elijah turns back to Richard, who's sweating now. "Is that true?" Richard chuckles dryly. "And you're just going to believe her?" She's paranoid. She's trying to blame me for her company's failures. But no one believes him. Elijah sees something else in Richard's eyes now. Panic. He turns back to Cynthia. "What did he steal?" Cynthia hesitates, then looks around. Finally, she says, "A formula." Elijah frowns. "For what?" Cynthia licks her lips. "For something that could change medicine forever. A neuroregenerative drug. One that could repair damaged brain cells." Elijah's breath catches. If that were true, it would be the biggest breakthrough in neurology. A cure for irreversible brain damage. Richard scoffs. "This is absurd." Cynthia ignores him. "We spent years developing it." But Richard, he saw a bigger opportunity. One that involved selling it to less ethical buyers. Elijah pieces it together. Richard wasn't just a thief. He was willing to sell medical breakthroughs to the highest bidder, no matter the consequences. And someone who ever bought that formula didn't want Cynthia making it to Paris. Elijah glances at the restrained man in black. Was he sent to finish the job? Before he can ask, a voice crackles over the intercom. Attention passengers, this is your captain. Due to security concerns, authorities will be boarding upon landing in Iceland. Please remain in your seats. Richard's head snaps up. His hands tighten into fists. He's trapped. Elijah watches his every movement. A desperate man is a dangerous man. Then, without warning, Richard bolts. He shoves past a flight attendant and sprints toward the galley. Elijah doesn't think. He chases him. Passengers gasp as Richard dives toward the emergency exit. He's trying to open it. At 35,000 feet, Elijah lunges, grabbing Richard's arm just as he yanks the handle. An alarm blares. "You idiot!" Elijah shouts, struggling to pull him back. The flight attendants join in, wrestling Richard away from the door. Richard thrashes. "You don't understand. I can't land in Iceland." Elijah shoves him against the wall. "Why? What happens in Iceland?" Richard pants, his eyes wild. Then he whispers something that makes Elijah's blood run cold. "They'll kill me." Elijah tightens his grip on Richard's arm, his heart pounding. "They'll kill me." The words hang in the air, heavy with dread. Passengers stare in shock. A flight attendant frantically presses a button on the intercom. "Security, we need assistance in the galley now." Richard struggles like a man possessed, but Elijah keeps him pinned against the bulkhead. "Who's going to kill you, Richard?" Elijah demands. Richard's breath is ragged. He shakes his head. "You don't get it. I was never supposed to be on this flight. I switched my ticket at the last second." Elijah frowns. "Why?" Richard's wild eyes dart around. Because I found out who I sold the formula to." The plane lurches slightly as turbulence rattles the cabin. Passengers yelp. But Elijah doesn't move. "Ooh," he presses. Richard licks his lips, sweat dripping down his temples. "You don't understand what's at stake. If they think I talked to Cynthia, I'm dead." Elijah's stomach twists. This wasn't just about corporate espionage. This was life or death. Then, from behind, the restrained man in black suddenly speaks. His voice is calm, controlled. "Mr. Davenport is correct." Elijah turns his head. The man smirks despite his restraints. "If he lands in Iceland, he won't leave the airport alive." A collective shudder moves through the passengers. Richard jerks forward. "See, I'm as good as dead. You have to let me go." Elijah shakes his head. "Running won't change anything." Richard clenches his jaw. "You think I'm just some crook, don't you? Some greedy businessman?" He barks out a bitter laugh. "I didn't know who I was selling to. I thought it was just another company looking to expand their research. But they're not just a company. He swallows hard. "There's something else." Elijah stares at him. "Who are they?" Richard's lips part, but he hesitates. The man in black exhales. "Oh, just tell him, Davenport. It's not like you're making it out of this anyway." Elijah turns to him. "You seem to know a lot about this." The man chuckles. "That's because I was sent to clean up Richard's mess." He nods towards Cynthia. "And hers." Gasps ripple through the crowd. Cynthia stiffens. "Who do you work for?" The man smiles. "You already know the answer." Elijah watches Cynthia's expression shift from confusion to realization to horror. She whispers a name. Halverson Dynamics. Richard flinches. Elijah frowns. "Never heard of them." Cynthia turns to him. "That's because they don't exist in the public eye. They specialize in," she swallows, "covert research, weapons development. They fund projects that push the limits of science, often beyond ethical lines." Elijah's stomach drops. Cynthia meets his gaze. They didn't buy the formula to save lives, Dr. Carter. They bought it to weaponize it. The realization hits Elijah like a freight train. A neuroregenerative drug, if modified, could be used for something far more sinister. Mind control, cognitive enhancement for soldiers, permanent alterations to the human brain, something cold and sharp twists in his gut. Richard exhales shakily. I didn't know, I swear. But once I found out, he shakes his head. I tried to disappear. I changed my ticket at the last second, hoping they wouldn't follow me. But they did. He jerks his head toward the man in black. That's their guy. Elijah turns back to the restrained man. He's still smirking, as if none of this phases him. A flight attendant steps forward. Sir, we'll be landing in 20 minutes. Security is waiting for him. The man in black chuckles. Security? Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea who you're dealing with. The plane shakes slightly as it descends. Richard whimpers. You don't understand. If they can get to me, they can get to any of us. Elijah narrows his eyes. Then let's make sure they don't. Richard stares at him, incredulous. You don't get it, doctor. These people, his voice breaks. They erase problems. And right now we're all problems. Elijah glances toward Cynthia. Her hands tighten around the armrest. Then we don't just land in Iceland, Elijah says. We expose them. Richard shakes his head. They control everything. You think an airport investigation will stop them? Elijah's gaze sharpens. Not an investigation. A broadcast. Richard blinks. What? Elijah turns to Cynthia. You were going to expose them in Paris. Why not start now? Cynthia hesitates. You mean? Elijah nods. Go public before we even land. If their name is everywhere, they can't make you disappear without raising alarms. Richard gapes at him. That's insane. Elijah shrugs. So is selling medical breakthroughs to criminals. Cynthia exhales. There's a satellite phone in the cockpit. If I can get a signal, I can leak my files before we even hit the ground. Richard grips his seat. You don't know what you're doing. They'll come after all of us. Elijah looks at the man in black. To his surprise, he's still smirking. Go ahead, the man says. Call whoever you want. But just remember, he leans forward. It won't change what happens when those doors open. The plane dips lower. Elijah clenches his fists. One way or another, this ends in Iceland. The plane descends through thick clouds, its engines humming steadily. But inside the cabin, tension is ready to snap. Elijah can feel it, the weight of every secret, every betrayal, every unspoken threat. Cynthia's fingers tremble as she grips the armrest. Richard breathes in shallow gasps, his knee bouncing restlessly. And the man in black? He just sits there, hands restrained, but smirking like he already knows how this will end. It won't change what happens when those doors open. Elijah clenches his jaw. They have 20 minutes before touchdown. 20 minutes before whatever waits for them in Iceland becomes real. And right now, Cynthia needs to send that broadcast before it's too late. How long will it take to upload the files? Elijah asks her. She exhales, calculating. If I get a stable connection, 3 to 5 minutes. Elijah nods. Then we don't have much time. A flight attendant, still pale from the chaos, approaches cautiously. The cockpit has a satellite phone. The captain said you can use it. Cynthia pushes herself up, unsteady on her feet. Richard suddenly grabs her arm. You're making a mistake. She yanks free. The only mistake was ever trusting you. She doesn't wait for a response. With determined steps, she heads toward the cockpit. Elijah watches her go, but his instincts won't let him relax. Something feels off. Across from him, the man in black tilts his head. You really think you can outmaneuver them, don't you? Elijah ignores him. Instead, he focuses on Richard. The CEO is sweating, but it's not just fear. It's something else. Guilt. You're still hiding something, Elijah says. Richard's fingers twitch. I told you everything. Elijah shakes his head. No. You told me what you wanted me to know. Richard's jaw clenches. You're afraid of Iceland, Elijah presses. Not just because of Halverson dynamics, but because of something else. What are you not telling us? Richard swallows hard. His eyes dart toward the man in black, as if weighing whether he should speak. And then the lights flicker. A collective gasp ripples through the cabin as the plane suddenly tilts. Elijah grips the seat in front of him. What the hell? The oxygen masks drop from the overhead compartments. Panic spreads. The intercom crackles, but the captain's voice is strained. We've lost partial power stabilizing now. Remain in your seats. Elijah glances out the window. There, still above the ocean, Cynthia. Without a word, Elijah pushes past stunned passengers and rushes toward the cockpit. But before he reaches it, a gunshot echoes through the cabin. Screams erupt. Elijah spins around, and his stomach drops. The man in black is free. A flight attendant lies on the ground, clutching her shoulder, blood seeping through her uniform. The passengers are frozen in fear as the man holds a silenced pistol in his hands. Everybody, he says calmly, sit down and shut up. A new kind of terror spreads. Elijah's mind races. How did he get free? Then he sees it. Richard. The zip ties that had bound the man in black are now loose on the floor. Elijah's pulse pounds. Richard set him free. The man in black tilts his head at Elijah, amused. You're quick, Doctor. Elijah swallows down his fury. He can't make a wrong move now. The gunman turns to Richard. Good boy, he says. Richard is shaking. I didn't have a choice. Elijah's stomach twists in disgust. You absolute coward. Richard's eyes dart to him, full of shame. You don't get it. If I helped them, they'd let me go. The man in black laughs. Oh, Richard. He presses the gun to Richard's forehead. You actually believe that? Richard's face drains of color. Elijah's breath catches. He's going to kill him. Think, Carter. Think. Elijah lunges forward. The man in black fires. Passengers scream, but Elijah slams into Richard, yanking him down. The bullet whizzes past, embedding itself into the bulkhead. The moment of chaos gives Elijah an opening. He grabs the gunman's wrist, forcing the weapon upward. A struggle erupts. The gun goes off again, shattering a window. A deafening roar fills the cabin as air rushes out. Passengers scream, gripping their seats. Loose papers and bags fly toward the breach. The man in black elbows Elijah in the ribs, but Elijah doesn't let go. He slams the gunman's hand against the seat armrest. The gun drops. Richard, in blind panic, grabs it. For a second, he hesitates. Then, hands shaking, he points it at the man in black. Don't move, Richard breathes. The gunman, for the first time, looks mildly impressed. The plane's emergency protocols seal the breech window. Oxygen returns. The passengers are still in shock, but no longer in immediate danger. And in the midst of it all, Cynthia steps out of the cockpit. She's holding the satellite phone. Elijah sees the glint in her eyes. She did it. The files are out. The world knows. The gunman slowly smirks. You think that changes anything? He murmurs. Elijah steps forward. I think it just changed everything. The intercom crackles. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are now preparing for landing in Iceland. The final descent begins. Elijah exhales. The hardest part is still ahead. The plane trembles as it begins its final descent toward Iceland. Outside the window, the dark ocean stretches endlessly beneath the twilight sky. But inside the cabin, a war is still raging. Elijah keeps his eyes locked on the man in black, who sits calmly despite having a gun now trained on him. Richard's hands tremble as he grips the weapon, his knuckles white. He's never held this much power before. You think you've won? The gunman murmurs, his voice infuriatingly amused. Richard swallows hard. Shut up. The man tilts his head. Or what? Richard hesitates. Elijah sees it immediately. Richard isn't a killer. The gunman does too. In a blur of movement, he lunges. Elijah reacts first. He shoves Richard aside, the gun clattering to the floor. The gunman swings at Elijah, but this time, Elijah is ready. He ducks, then drives a punch into the man's ribs. The gunman barely flinches. He grabs Elijah by the collar, slamming him against the seat. The world spins, but Elijah doesn't let the pain stop him. He's fighting for more than just himself. Passengers scream. Flight attendants plead for order. But this isn't a fight that can be stopped. The gunman pulls back for another strike, then suddenly jerks forward, eyes wide. Cynthia stands behind him, gripping a metal serving tray like a weapon. She just smashed it over his head. For the first time, the gunman loses balance. Elijah doesn't waste the opening. He grabs the fallen gun and aims. "Don't move," he says. The gunman breathes heavily, staring at Elijah. Then, to his shock, the man smiles. Elijah narrows his eyes. "What?" The gunman chuckles. "Look outside, doctor." Elijah doesn't want to take his eyes off him, but something in the gunman's tone forces him to glance at the window. And his blood runs cold. Black SUVs are already waiting on the runway. Dozens of them. Blacked out windows. No markings. No police in sight. "They're here," Cynthia whispers. Elijah's grip tightens on the gun. They never had a chance. This wasn't a rescue. This was an ambush. The intercom crackles. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We will be landing in approximately 5 minutes. Please remain seated." A collective dread settles over the passengers. "Elijah," Cynthia whispers. "We can't get off this plane." Elijah's mind races. She's right. If they step outside, Halverson Dynamics will take them. And they won't make it out of Iceland alive. Richard stares at the window in horror. "Oh, God? They're going to kill us all." The gunman smirks. "Well, not all of you. Just the ones that matter." Elijah turns to the cockpit. "The captain. We need to tell him to abort the landing." A flight attendant hesitates. But we're almost out of fuel." "I don't care," Elijah snaps. "Get me in there." The attendant fumbles with a key and unlocks the cockpit door. Elijah steps inside. The captain and co-pilot glance at him, startled. "Sir, you can't be in here. We can't land," Elijah says. "Look at the runway." The captain frowns, adjusting his headset. He glances at the SUVs waiting below. His jaw tightens. He sees it too. "Who are they?" he asks. "Not the people you think," Elijah says. "And if we land, they'll take hostages. Maybe worse." The captain hesitates. "We don't have enough fuel to turn around. We're already committed to the approach." Elijah's stomach twists. "Think, Carter. Think." "Then stall," he says. The co-pilot blinks. "What?" "Don't land immediately. Circle. Delay. Whatever it takes. Just don't touch the ground until we figure something out." The captain exhales. He doesn't understand the full picture, but he understands fear. He nods. "I'll see what I can do." The plane suddenly tilts back up, veering away from the runway. In the cabin, passengers gasp as the landing is aborted. Elijah steps out of the cockpit. The gunman watches him with mild amusement. "Smart move," he admits. "Buys you what, 10 minutes?" Elijah ignores him. He kneels beside Cynthia. "You got the files out, right?" Cynthia nods. "Yes. But that doesn't mean we're safe." Elijah takes a breath. "Then we change the rules." She frowns. "How?" Elijah glances at the terrified passengers. Dozens of phones. Dozens of cameras. "We go public. Right now." Richard's eyes widen. "You're insane." Elijah turns to the crowd. "Listen to me. We are in danger. The people waiting for us down there, they don't work for the government. They don't work for the airline. They work for a corporation that wants to make us disappear. Murmurs of panic. We need proof, Cynthia whispers. Elijah nods. He lifts the gun. Someone record this. A flight attendant hesitates, then raises her phone. Elijah turns to the man in black. Who do you work for? The gunman chuckles. Oh, doctor, you're trying to make me confess? Elijah presses the gun against his chest. Start talking. Passengers gasp. The gunman's smirk fades. And then a new voice crackles over the intercom. One Elijah doesn't recognize. A deep, authoritative voice. Dr. Carter. Ms. Wallace. You've delayed this long enough. Elijah's blood goes cold. The plane's radio has been hijacked. Let's not make this difficult. The voice continues. Land the plane. Hand over the files. And we'll consider letting some of you live. Cynthia grips Elijah's arm. They're already inside the tower. The passengers stare in paralyzed horror. Richard mutters, "We're dead." Elijah grits his teeth. Not yet. Because now it's war. The hijacked voice crackles through the intercom, thick with authority, soaked in quiet menace. Dr. Carter. Ms. Wallace. You've delayed this long enough. Elijah grips the seat in front of him, his mind racing. They're inside the control tower. They're speaking directly to us. Let's not make this difficult. The voice continues. Land the plane. Hand over the files. And we'll consider letting some of you live. A collective shudder runs through the passengers. Richard sways where he stands, pale and trembling. Oh God! Oh God! This is real. Cynthia clenches her fists, her breathing shaky. Elijah sees it. She's terrified. But she doesn't back down. We're not landing, she says, her voice louder, steadier than before. Not until the world sees what you've done. The voice chuckles softly. Oh, Cynthia, you still think you have control here. A beep from the cockpit. The captain's voice comes through the speakers. This is Captain Rhodes. Whoever you are interfering with a live flight frequency. We don't interfere, Captain. We decide. Elijah's stomach knots. You're low on fuel, Captain. The voice continues. You won't make it far. And we both know you have no permission to enter another country's airspace without clearance. Cynthia grips Elijah's arm. They're right. They have nowhere to go. The gunman, still restrained but smirking, tilts his head. This is the part where you realize you were never going to win. Elijah ignores him. He focuses on the intercom speaker. And he makes a decision. He presses the button to respond. If you want the files, Elijah says firmly, come and get them. A silence. Then soft laughter. Very well, doctor. A click. The radio goes dead. Elijah turns to Cynthia. They're coming. She nods. I know. The passengers begin panicking in hushed whispers. This isn't just a corporate cover-up anymore. This is survival. Then a sharp metallic clank. Elijah's head snaps toward the emergency exit door. The sound came from outside. Richard breathes. No. No, a second clank. Elijah moves fast. He rushes toward the nearest window, and his blood turns to ice. A small black aircraft is flying dangerously close to their plane's fuselage. And on its side, two armed operatives in black tactical suits, gripping onto a latch, preparing to jump onto the aircraft. Jesus Christ, Cynthia whispers. Elijah spins around. They're boarding the plane. A third clank. Then, the emergency door rips open. The decompression alarm screams. Wind roars through the cabin. Papers, bags, and loose objects spiral into the air. Passengers scream. Flight attendants grab onto whatever they can. And then two men in tactical gear climb inside. They move with chilling precision, weapons drawn, scanning the room like professionals. The first man locks eyes with Elijah. Dr. Carter, he says smoothly. Step forward. Elijah doesn't move. The second operative speaks next. Ms. Wallace, come with us. Cynthia grips Elijah's sleeve. Terror flashes in her eyes. Richard is hyperventilating. He takes a single step back. The first operative cocks his head. Let's not make this ugly. Then a gunshot. Passengers scream. One of the operatives staggers back. Elijah spins and sees the flight attendant from earlier, the one Richard betrayed holding a smoking pistol. She just shot one of them. The injured operative growls, in pain but stays on his feet. The second operative raises his weapon toward her and Elijah moves. He grabs a loose fire extinguisher and slams it into the man's head. The operative crashes against the seats. The passengers erupt in chaos. Richard panics and runs. Cynthia grabs the downed operative's weapon and points it at the second one. "Stay down," she screams. Elijah breathes hard. The fight isn't over. A fourth clank. More are coming. Elijah turns to Cynthia. "We need to shut that door." She nods. But how Elijah grabs the wounded operative by the vest and hauls him toward the open hatch. "What are you?" The man chokes. Elijah throws him out. The wind snatches him away. Cynthia gasps. The passengers scream again. The remaining operative snarls in rage. He swings his fist at Elijah, but Elijah ducks and slams him against the seats. "Shut the door," Elijah shouts. Cynthia grits her teeth and pulls the lever. The hatch seals. The cabin pressurizes again. The roaring wind stops. A suffocating silence follows. Elijah turns. The final operative is pinned beneath him. His breathing is ragged. His weapon is out of reach. "Game over," Elijah mutters. The man smiles. "You really think so?" Elijah hesitates. Then the plane tilts violently. The passengers scream. The intercom crackles. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hijacker's voice returns, cold and final. "If you won't land, then we'll bring you down ourselves." Elijah's heart pounds. They're going to crash the plane. And they have. No way out. The plane lurches violently, its nose tilting downward. Passengers scream as the cabin shakes. Overhead compartments burst open, spilling bags and belongings into the air. Elijah grips the seat, barely keeping his footing. "If you won't land, then we'll bring you down ourselves." The hijacker's voice from the intercom echoes in his mind. This wasn't just a threat. They're doing it. Elijah turns toward Cynthia. She's clutching onto a seatbelt, her face pale but determined. The last surviving operative, the one Elijah pinned, starts laughing. "You idiots," the man wheezes. "You thought you won?" Elijah grabs him by the collar. "What did you do?" The operative grins through bloodied lips. "We're not just in the control tower, Doctor. We're in your plane." Elijah's stomach twists. That's when he sees a blinking red light on the man's wrist. A remote override. "You're not flying this plane anymore," the operative sneers. "We are." Elijah doesn't think. He rips the device off the man's wrist, but the damage is already done. The plane dives harder. Passengers cry out. Cynthia grabs Elijah's arm. "We're going down too fast." Elijah grits his teeth. "Not yet, we're not." The cockpit. They need to get to the cockpit. He shoves the operative aside and pulls Cynthia with him, pushing past terrified passengers. In the cockpit, the pilots are fighting the controls. "We've lost manual override," the captain shouts, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "It's remote control." Elijah pushes forward. "Can you cut the connection?" The co-pilot is frantically flipping switches. "I'm trying. But whatever signal they're using, it's overriding everything." Elijah's eyes dart toward the controls. Think Carter. Then he sees it. A manual kill switch for external signals. But it's guarded by a fail-safe. If we trigger that without the right shutdown sequence, the engines could, the co-pilot warns. "Cut out completely," Elijah finishes. Cynthia grabs his arm. "So it's either crash or stall in midair?" Elijah looks back at the cabin. Terrified faces. Mothers clutching their children. An old man whispering a prayer. The plane shudders again. They don't have a choice. Do it, Elijah orders. The co-pilot swallows hard. This could kill us. Not doing it will kill us for sure, Elijah says. The captain nods. All right. Cutting external controls. In 3, 2. He flips the switch. Silence. For a split second, the plane stops, responding entirely. Then the engines stutter. Elijah feels it a terrifying freefall. A weightless moment. Passengers scream. The altimeter spirals downward. The world tilts. Cynthia grips Elijah's hand so tightly it hurts. Then the engines roar back to life. The pilots pull the controls back. The plane stabilizes. The cabin erupts in gasps and sobs. Elijah exhales sharply. His heart is hammering. The co-pilot slumps back. Jesus. The captain wipes his forehead. That was close. Elijah looks at Cynthia. Her knuckles are still white, but her breath is steady. We're alive, she whispers. The captain shakes his head. For now. But we still have a problem. Elijah turns back to the window. The SUVs are still waiting on the runway. And the radio crackles again. Impressive, Dr. Carter. But you're still in our hands. The plane levels out, but the danger isn't over. They're about to land into a trap. The plane stabilizes, but the tension inside only tightens. Outside the window, the black SUVs remain, engines idling like predators waiting for their prey. Impressive, Dr. Carter. But you're still in our hands. The hijacker's voice over the radio sends a chill through the cabin. Elijah glances at Cynthia. Her hands are clenched into fists. She knows what's coming. We can't land, she whispers. If we do, we're dead. The captain exhales sharply. We don't have a choice. We're too low on fuel to divert. Elijah grips the back of the pilot's seat. Think, Carter. They can't turn back. They can't land. And Halverson Dynamics knows it. The passengers murmur in fear, whispers growing. The man in black, still restrained in the back, smiles knowingly. You had your fun, he says, voice dripping with amusement. But this is where it ends. Elijah ignores him. Is there another runway? He asks the captain. Negative, the captain says. They've locked us onto an approach. If we try to veer off, they'll claim we're a security threat. Elijah swallows hard. Then we need another way out. Cynthia's eyes widen. Wait, what about the maintenance hangars? The co-pilot blinks. You want to land in a hangar? Not land, Cynthia says. Hide. If we don't let them get to us, they lose control of the situation. The captain hesitates. That's insane. It's also our only shot, Elijah says. The plane dips lower. They're seconds away from committing to the landing. The SUVs start moving, positioning themselves along the runway. They're getting ready to intercept. Elijah's pulse pounds. They have one shot. The captain clenches his jaw. Then he makes his choice. Diverting to the hangars. The plane veers off course. On the ground, Halverson's men react instantly. The SUVs roar to life, chasing toward the new landing path. Inside the plane, passengers gasp as the sharp turn pushes them against their seats. Elijah grips a rail, watching through the window. Come on, he mutters. The hangars are ahead, but so are the SUVs. They're not letting us reach it, Cynthia warns. Elijah thinks fast. Captain, can you trigger a false distress beacon? The captain blinks. Why? Because if we send an emergency alert now, air traffic control has to respond. And if we get their attention, Halverson loses the shadows they operate in. The captain nods, flipping switches. An alarm blares through the control tower. A security officer's voice crackles through the cockpit radio. Flight 227, we've received your distress signal. Confirm emergency. The SUVs hesitate. They weren't expecting this. Elijah grips Cynthia's hand. They can't take us if the world is watching. But the hijacker's voice cuts through the speakers again. Very clever, Doctor. But we came prepared. Then, gunfire. Outside, Two SUVs cut ahead, blocking the hangar entrance. Armed men pour out, rifles raised. Inside, passengers scream. The captain slams the intercom. Everyone down. The plane skids hard, the wheels screeching against the tarmac. The nose dips dangerously as the pilots fight for control. Too fast. Too sharp. Too close. Elijah braces himself. Then, impact. The plane slams through a security fence, crashing into the side of the hangar. The force throws Elijah forward. He barely catches himself before hitting the bulkhead. The cabin erupts in panic. Lights flicker. Alarms blare. Elijah shakes his head, forcing himself up. "Cynthia," he shouts. She's on the floor, dazed but alive. She nods weakly. "I'm okay." But outside, Halverson's men are already approaching. Footsteps pound on metal. A shadow looms over the cracked emergency exit door. They're coming in. Elijah grits his teeth. No more running. Now they fight. Smoke fills the cabin. Alarms blare. The impact of the crash still vibrates through Elijah's bones as he pulls himself upright. Outside, Halverson's operatives are closing in. Inside, passengers are crying, shaken but alive. Some are scrambling to their feet, others clutching their loved ones. Elijah's mind races. There's no way out through the front. The emergency exits are compromised. The cockpit is in lockdown. But the cargo hold. Elijah spins to Cynthia. "Can we get to the lower deck?" She coughs, wiping blood from a cut on her temple. "If the impact didn't jam the hatch, maybe." Richard groans from behind them. "We're all going to die." Elijah grabs his collar. "Not if you stop whining and help us." Richard swallows, nodding shakily. Then a metallic thud. The emergency exit door rips open. Gunmen flood inside. Passengers scream. Elijah shoves Cynthia toward the back. "Go!" One of the gunmen spots them. "There!" A shot explodes past Elijah's head. He ducks, dragging Richard with him. Cynthia reaches the rear hatch. It's jammed. She curses, kicking it. "I need help." Elijah throws his weight against the door. It groans, but won't budge. Behind them, gunfire erupts. A passenger fights back, throwing a fire extinguisher at one of the gunmen. The distraction is enough. Elijah slams the hatch again. It bursts open. "Get in," he shouts. Richard dives through first. Cynthia follows. Elijah is about to jump when a hand grips his shoulder. The man in black. Elijah spins, throwing a punch. The man catches it. "Doctor," he says, grinning, "you really should have just landed." Elijah headbutts him. The man staggers back. Cynthia grabs Elijah's arm, yanking him through the hatch. They slam it shut. Darkness. The cargo hold is tight, cold, filled with luggage. "Now what?" Richard whispers. Elijah searches. There, a maintenance hatch. He pries it open, revealing the underside of the plane. Outside, sirens wail. Icelandic security forces are finally approaching. Elijah exhales. "This is it." We crawl out. We blend in. We get to them first. Cynthia nods. "And Halverson?" Elijah glances back toward the sealed cargo door. They won't stay locked out for long. He climbs through the hatch. Cynthia follows. Richard hesitates. I can't." Elijah grabs him. "Move." They drop onto the tarmac. The night is cold, the wind howling. In the distance, armed security guards rush toward the wreckage. Elijah pulls Cynthia forward. "Run." They sprint toward the floodlights. Behind them, gunfire erupts. Halverson's men break through. But it's too late. Icelandic authorities storm the runway. A shout over the loudspeakers. "Drop your weapons." The gunmen hesitate. And then, the air is filled with blazing blue lights. FBI vehicles. Interpol forces. Reporters with cameras. Elijah stops running. They did it. The world is watching. Cynthia collapses against him, shaking. We made it. Richard falls to his knees, sobbing. The man in black, dragged out by Icelandic forces, just smirks. You think this stops them? He murmurs. Elijah stares down at him. No. But it's a start. Cynthia raises her head. Now the world knows. And as cameras flash, as sirens wail, Elijah knows one thing for certain. They survived. For now. What a ride. From a first-class seat to a high-stakes conspiracy at 30,000 feet, this was a battle for survival like no other. But now we want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you love thrilling twists, intense action, and stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an adventure. See you in the next one.